information in Unit 3 of your manual, which is about developing long-term client follow-up procedures and also classification of mortgage readiness. So we'll talk a little bit about, is your client short-term or long-term? And then we're also going to talk about using housing choice voucher clients and moving them toward readiness to purchase a home. Let's talk first about classification of mortgage readiness. If you're following along in your manual, you'll find this information on page 103. So when we're developing information and helping our long-term clients move toward home ownership, we should talk about, how do we classify clients based on their mortgage readiness? And what does that really mean? Well, the idea in moving them toward readiness to purchase a home is that they have really overcome all barriers. And the challenge there is just that the client's got to be willing to follow through and make either the changes that are necessary or sometimes the sacrifices that are necessary to overcome those barriers. It's our job to monitor everything and to keep track and, we're kind of the coaches and the cheerleaders on the sidelines, but really the action part of it is going to come from our clients. So they really are the ones kind of driving the ship here and making the choices and determining how long it's going to take them or how quickly they're going to get there. So when we look at HUD's classification of mortgage readiness, short-term means that they're going to be ready to achieve home ownership and to get approved for a mortgage within 3 months. So that's pretty quick. 1 to 3 months is basically going to be the client who walks in. They have good credit. They've got good, stable, steady income already. They just need kind of some tweaking along the way and some information on buying a house, but they really are pretty mortgage ready before they even come in and talk with you. Because in 1 to 3 months, you're not going to be able to change much in the way of income. You're not going to be able to have much of an impact on their credit score. So really short term is essentially going to be somebody who's pretty well ready. They just need some guidance and direction. Now midterm is defined as 4 to 6 months away. So this is probably still somebody who's got pretty steady employment because it's hard to change employment that quickly. This is probably someone who has some credit or debt issues that need to be resolved. Maybe they need to bring their score up a little bit. So the fact is, midterm still is a fairly quick amount of time that they're going to have to move through their issues. But 4 to 6 months gives them time to improve a credit score, build up some savings, so they can do a lot more work in 4 to 6 months. Now, many of our clients are long-term clients. So we know that they're they're not going to be able to accomplish mortgage readiness within 6 months. So we know that it's going to be beyond that. Sometimes it's a year or two. So sometimes we have a client that we know this is going to be a long-term plan to get you there. So long-term is anything that's going to take longer than 6 months. So you can see that many of our clients are probably going to be in that category. If we talk about these long-term clients, let's discuss a little bit about what do we do and how do we follow up and make sure that they really are kind of sticking with it. So you've got a couple options here. For these clients that you know they're going to be on a 7-month or longer plan, you can set up your own determination about what's going to work best with them. Do you want to check in with them once a month and maybe just have them come in on a regular monthly basis? You might decide you're just going to meet with them on a quarterly basis. That's okay too. Depending on how long-term their plan is, that may be all that they need to kind of keep on track. You might decide that you're going to kind of do it halfway through, that if they are a year and a half away, maybe you're not going to meet with them until 9 months out. I would suspect that that one is probably a little harder to accomplish because if you're not meeting with them for more than 6 months, it's going to be pretty hard to really stay engaged. So I would think on these long-term clients, it would be preferable to stick with once a month or once a quarter. But some clients that are really committed, Maybe they only need to meet with you a couple times. So it's really just going to depend on how long-term they are, and it's going to be up to the client as well as to how involved they want to be and how often they want to check in with you. So it's going to be a combination of what your agency decides would be a good follow-up protocol with also meeting the client where they would like to come in. Be sure that you're keeping track of your appointments. As I mentioned in an earlier section, a lot of people use Outlook. That's really helpful because you can set those reminders. You can set permissions so other people can schedule things for you so that they can see your schedule. If you're using Home Counselor Online or Counselor Max, you have calendar functions available there. And most of the client management systems will have some sort of a calendar function. Even Google Calendar can be pretty useful. You have to decide if you want support staff to have access to your calendars. Do you want to give them the ability to schedule appointments? That's kind of positive and negative. The positive is that somebody else could take your call and access your calendar and go ahead and put you down for an appointment, but they may or may not know the full story. They may not know that that client needs to allow extra time. So again, you just have to be sure that you're keeping track of your calendar. Even if you're not the one scheduling all of your appointments, be sure that you know what's included so you can keep up on your follow-up. Now we need to talk a little bit about clients who get stalled or who drop out or withdraw. So there is a process that HUD allows which will allow us to either suspend or terminate a client file. So the reality is that this is going to happen. So let's go ahead and talk about the requirements. As far as terminating a client file or suspending it because the client's not responsive, HUD has set for us a 3-touch rule. We have to make 3 attempts to reach the client, 2 of those by phone, and 1 of those in writing. Now this is a minimum. You can do as much as you want. But HUD says that if you have attempted 3 times, twice by phone and once in writing, to reach out to that client to engage them, and they are not responsive, at that point you can terminate the file and close it. Now, as always, everything has to be documented. If it's not noted, it didn't happen. So keep good documentation in your records. And before you actually suspend or close a client file, you might even want to check local records. Sometimes a client went ahead and they were able to buy a house and they just didn't tell you. And so if you have a way to check local property records, take a look at that because maybe you could close them out as a successful case. Maybe they were able to attain home ownership. And that would look good because that would be considered a successful completion then and not a terminated file if you were able to document that. If a client tells you they want to drop out and that they want to withdraw, well, in that case, all you need to do is document the conversation and make a note of that and state that the file is going to be closed. And at that point, if you're using HCO, go ahead and go into the 9902 screen and you can resolve it as decided not to purchase. So in this case, there's not that 3-touch rule. Okay, you don't have to keep bugging them about it. If they just say, I'm dropping out, I'm not interested, all you have to do is just document it and make sure that you could go ahead and close it out. Okay, so just make sure that everything's documented with everything you do and that you've got proper records of everything so that that way if you have an audit or if the client says, well, I never said I wasn't going to pursue it, you've got full documentation and you can go ahead and record everything. Now, a couple things to go over about working with clients that are on housing choice vouchers. And if they're in a family self-sufficiency program, we'll talk a little bit about that too. And we've got some supplemental information in your book. This section is covered on page 107 in your manual. So housing choice voucher clients, this is a rental assistance program. It's funded and it's monitored and controlled by HUD. And it allows for affordable rental housing. And particularly in some areas where rents are very high, it would be hard for a low to moderate income household to pay market rents. So this allows for an affordable rental housing situation And so that way it's got controlled rent for those housing choice voucher clients. Typically the housing authorities, they own the public housing projects, and so they're going to own and maintain those housing projects, and they're also going to be available at a reduced rate. So this could work a couple different ways depending on how it's set up in your particular city. But the whole idea here is to provide affordable rental housing, because there are plenty of low and moderate income households that there is no way they could afford to pay market rent in a particular area. So affordable rental housing is just a critical, critical need. Now, why would this be the clientele that you want to work with? Well, it's going to give you a pipeline of renters that need financial information. And it's going to be a low to moderate income renter who probably needs that information more than anybody else. And if you're working in these underserved markets, you're going to get very likely to get better attendance with your programs. So, this is sometimes the clientele that gets overlooked. They're not getting a lot of direct information. Nobody's really courting them to see, hey, maybe you could be moving into homeownership. So it really gives you, quite a market that you may be able to work with. And because of that, you might be able to accomplish a lot with this clientele. You could have, potential clients coming in and closing on mortgages with this particular group of folks, and it's just kind of an overlooked opportunity, I think, in a lot of areas. So it can make your numbers look really good if you're able to get some of these housing choice voucher clients into your programs for pre-purchase. And definitely it gives you an opportunity to go out and look for funding if this is what you're accomplishing. A couple things about the Family Self-Sufficiency Program. With this program, it's a voluntary program. So it's meant to promote independence, economic independence, and self-sufficiency. And it's done just through several things. It's really through educating your clients. So if a client agrees that they want to participate in the Family Self-Sufficiency Program, they've got to be willing to receive case management services. So they've got to be motivated, first of all, to participate. They're going to be asked to sign a contract and that, really make a commitment that I'm going to go ahead and participate and I'm going to make a change. It's not something they have to do overnight. It's set up as a 5-year plan. So these are our long-term clients. But we are there to really help guide them and to move them into economic independence. And so this way they're not relying on assistance. So the case management part of it, it's one-on-one, and over a period of 5 years, as you can imagine, probably get to know your clients pretty well. So it's something, it just depends a lot on their level of motivation. Some people can really make huge strides and big changes in a 5-year time. Other people at the end of 5 years have not made much progress. So everybody's circumstance really is different, and it's just going to depend on their level of commitment. So this is something we can coach them and guide them, but they really have to be the ones who want to make the change. As far as funding for Section 8 programs, what happens with this is that with an eligible client, they're going to go through a local or a state public housing authority, and sometimes these programs are subgranted to other nonprofits or social service agencies. So the Public Housing Administration, they may oversee the program, but then have a subgrantee like a nonprofit or another agency who administers the program. So, in this case, what you have is that a property owner agrees to rent to a Section 8 recipient, and then that property owner gets 2 payments. They get one payment from the tenant, but then they get a second payment from the PHA. So they're actually getting 2 sources of funding. So some landlords really prefer to rent to Section 8 tenants because they know they've got guaranteed funds coming from the PHA, but they've also got rental income coming from the client. And the way it'll be set up is that the client will have to pay 30% at most of their income, and then the rest of it's going to be paid through the PHA for them. And each municipality is going to have a set amount of vouchers. There's never enough. There's always, at least in my experience, there's always a waiting list for Section 8, and sometimes it only opens up once every couple years because it's a very popular program. But because there are limitations, it's pretty strictly controlled. Now, if you're working with Housing Choice Voucher clients and moving them toward home ownership, as you can imagine, they have some kind of more specific challenges when they're working with these different areas. If you look at the areas that you're watching, I mean, those look pretty normal, right? Based on any client, you want to talk about income and debt and credit and savings. But you have some specific challenges with Housing Choice Voucher clients. For instance, with income, this is frequently their biggest barrier because they may be working with very low income. That's why they're in a Housing Choice program, because they can only pay 30% of their income toward housing. So frequently, this really is the biggest barrier to home ownership because they simply cannot qualify for much of a mortgage based on a very low income. As far as income, you may also be dealing with a work history that's not steady. They may have periods of unemployment or underemployment, so sometimes the work history could be the issue. When it comes to debts, you've got all the normal debt issues about paying everything on time, but when you're working with really low-income clients, even a small amount of debt can be an issue because even though it's not a lot, their income is also not a lot. So as a percentage, it amounts to a pretty big chunk of their income, even though the amount of the debt might not be much. If someone only has a $1,000 income and they go out and get a car payment that's $300 a month, that's 30% of their income. Even if they get a car payment $200 a month, that's 20% of their income. So debt really can be problematic here. You may also have issues with Housing Choice Voucher clients who are unbanked. Of course, we see this across all of our client base, but sometimes traditional banking really can be a challenge. Or they've got extra challenges sticking with their budget because they have much lower income that they're working with, so they do have trouble adhering to their budget. So there's a lot of specific areas to monitor here. You may have clients that are disabled, and perhaps they don't have any way that they can go out and create extra income. It might not be something that they have the option to do. So it's going to be really important with these clients to stick with them and make sure that we create an action plan and kind of guide them in the direction that we want them to go. Also, when you're working with Housing Choice Voucher clients, it's going to take some work to identify participating lenders because you may not have a complete list of all the lenders in your area that participate in this type of program. And it's going to be hard too because when you're working with these clients on choosing a home, there could be some restrictions on the location. So the Public Housing Authority may have a target area or a target market that it's restricted to. So you may have some extra challenges finding a home in that particular area. And it's hard too because you're moving from a rental situation to a home ownership situation. So in a rental property, you're not worried about maintenance or homeowner association dues or condo fees. So those are going to be new expenses that have to be, you got to get out of that rental mentality because now you're moving into home ownership, so you have some extra challenges there. And even something like the importance of home inspections and making sure that, everything's getting checked, and, home inspections are really critical because you want to know exactly what you're dealing with now that you're going to be in charge of maintenance issues. So a couple specific things to really watch for there if you're dealing with Housing Voucher Choice clients. So this will end this section.